Sometimes the most profound moments in our lives arrive disguised as ordinary Tuesday afternoons. They slip past our defenses when we're too busy, too distracted, or too certain we understand the world around us. For Victor Blackwood, CEO of Meridian Industries, such a moment was waiting just beyond his mahogany office door, a moment that would shatter everything he thought he knew about family, loyalty, and the invisible threads that bind us together. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The 42nd floor of the Meridian Tower offered Victor Blackwood a commanding view of downtown Chicago. But on this particular afternoon, in late October, he barely glanced at the sprawling cityscape beyond his floor-to-ceiling windows. His attention was laser-focused on the quarterly projections displayed across 3 monitors, each screen telling the same story. Meridian Industries was thriving under his leadership. Victor's corner office reflected his methodical approach to success. Every piece of furniture had been carefully selected. The Italian leather chairs, the conference table crafted from reclaimed oak, the abstract paintings that cost more than most people's annual salaries. It was a space designed to intimidate competitors and reassure investors, and it served both purposes flawlessly. At 38, Victor had built Meridian from a struggling tech startup into a multi-billion-dollar empire. The financial magazines loved to profile him. The youngest CEO to crack the Fortune 500, the strategic genius who had revolutionized cloud-based logistics solutions. What they rarely mentioned was the price of such meteoric success. His phone buzzed with its familiar urgency. "Mr. Blackwood, the Henderson Group is holding on line 2, his assistant Rebecca announced through the intercom. "And don't forget, you have the board presentation at 4:30. Victor nodded to no one in particular, a habit he'd developed during the countless hours he spent alone in this office. The Henderson Group represented a potential $300 million acquisition, the kind of deal that would cement Meridian's dominance in the Pacific Northwest market. He should have been excited, energized by the prospect of another victory. Instead, he felt the familiar weight of exhaustion settling into his shoulders. The truth Victor rarely admitted, even to himself, was that success had become both his greatest achievement and his most persistent captor. 18-hour workdays had become routine. Board meetings bled into conference calls, which dissolved into strategy sessions that stretched well past midnight. Somewhere in the relentless pursuit of market share and profit margins, Victor had lost track of almost everything else. His phone buzzed again, this time with a text from his housekeeper, Elena Rodriguez. "Mr. Blackwood wanted to remind you that Sophia and Mason have their parent-teacher conferences next week. Should I reschedule your business trip to Portland?" Victor stared at the message for a long moment. Sophia and Mason, his 8-year-old twins. When had he last seen them for more than a few rushed minutes in the morning? When had he last helped with homework, or heard about their day, or simply sat with them without checking his phone? The twins lived with him in his Lincoln Park mansion, a sprawling estate he'd purchased 2 years earlier. At the time, it had seemed like the perfect solution. Plenty of space, a prestigious address, excellent schools nearby. Now, the house often felt more like an expensive hotel, where he occasionally slept between business trips. Elena Rodriguez had been managing his household for 3 years now. She was efficient, discreet, and seemed to anticipate needs before they arose. More importantly, she was patient with the twins in ways Victor had never learned to be. Elena ensured they ate nutritious meals, completed their homework, and maintained some semblance of routine despite their father's chaotic schedule. Victor often wondered what the twins thought of their life. They'd been barely 5 when their mother, Victoria, had died in a car accident during a thunderstorm. The grief had nearly destroyed him, not just the loss of his wife, but the sudden, overwhelming responsibility of raising 2 children alone while running a company that demanded every waking moment. In those early months, he'd tried to be both father and CEO, but the balance had proven impossible. Nannies came and went. Au pairs lasted a few weeks before finding better opportunities. Finally, his attorney had recommended Eleanor, a widow herself, with grown children and impeccable references. She'd transformed the chaos of their household into something that resembled stability. But stability, Victor had learned, wasn't the same as connection. He provided for his children in every material way imaginable. Private school, music lessons, summer camps that cost more than most families' vacations. Yet he often felt like a stranger in his own home, observing their lives from the periphery while more urgent matters demanded his attention. The twins had adapted with the resilience that children possess. They'd learned not to expect their father at school plays or soccer games. They'd stopped asking why he worked so late or when he'd be home for dinner. Sophia, the more outspoken of the two, had once asked if he loved his computer more than he loved them. The question had hit him like a physical blow, but before he could formulate an answer, she'd shrugged and wandered off to find Elena. Mason, quieter by nature, had developed his own coping mechanisms. He drew elaborate pictures of their family, always including Eleanor prominently in the center, with Victor appearing smaller and usually positioned at the edge of the page. The symbolism wasn't lost on Victor, but acknowledging it would have required confronting truths he wasn't ready to face. As autumn deepened and the holiday season approached, Victor found himself making the same promises he'd made the year before. After this merger, after the next product launch, after the board approved the expansion plan, he'd find more time for the twins. But each resolution seemed to dissolve under the pressure of the next crisis. The next opportunity, the next decision that supposedly couldn't. Wait, the irony wasn't lost on him that he'd built a company focused on efficiency and connection. Meridian's logistics software helped businesses stay closer to their customers and streamline their operations. Yet his own life had become a masterclass in disconnection, with the people who mattered most becoming casualties of his relentless ambition. Outside his office window, the October sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting the Chicago skyline in shades of gold and amber. Soon, Elena would be helping the twins with their homework, preparing their dinner and listening to their stories about school. She would tuck them in, read them stories, and ensure they felt safe and cared for in the vast emptiness of their Lincoln Park mansion. And Victor would remain here in his perfectly appointed office, conquering markets and building an empire while missing the only conquest that truly mattered, the hearts of his own children. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. 3 weeks later, on a Thursday evening that began like any other, Victor found himself driving through the tree-lined streets of Lincoln Park earlier than usual. The Henderson Group acquisition had fallen through at the last minute, a regulatory snag that would delay negotiations for at least 6 months. For the first time in recent memory, Victor's calendar showed an unexpected gap of freedom. The November air carried the crisp promise of winter as he pulled into his circular driveway. The mansion's warm lights glowed against the gathering dusk, creating an inviting scene that felt almost foreign to him. Usually he arrived home to find most of the windows dark, the twins already tucked away in their beds. The day's life concluded without his participation. Victor paused at his front door, fishing for his keys while noticing sounds he rarely encountered. Voices drifting from somewhere inside the house, punctuated by occasional laughter. The sounds drew him forward with unexpected curiosity. As he stepped into the marble foyer, the voices became clearer. They were coming from the direction of the kitchen, but not the formal dining area where Eleanor typically served the twins their dinner. These voices seemed to emanate from the smaller breakfast nook that overlooked the garden, a space Victor had chosen for its aesthetic appeal but rarely used. No, Mason, remember what we talked about, came Elena's patient voice. When you're adding fractions, you need to find the common denominator first. What's the smallest number that both 4 and 6 can divide into? 12. Sophia's voice chimed in triumphantly. It's 12, right, Miss Elena? Victor found himself moving toward the kitchen with unusual stealth, drawn by a scene he'd never witnessed. Through the archway, he could see Eleanor seated at the small round table, flanked by both twins. Mason's math homework was spread across the surface, while Sophia worked on what appeared to be a science project, a miniature volcano constructed from clay and cardboard. Very good. Sophia, Elena said, her voice warm with genuine pride. But let Mason work through this one himself. Remember, we learn best when we struggle a little bit. What struck Victor most powerfully wasn't the homework assistance. He'd assumed Eleanor helped with such things as part of her duties. It was the atmosphere surrounding this simple scene. The three of them had created a pocket of warmth and focus that seemed to exist entirely separate from the grand, expensive spaces that surrounded them. Elena wore a simple cardigan over her usual work clothes, her graying hair pulled back in a practical bun. She'd positioned herself so that she could see both children's work simultaneously, offering guidance with the kind of patient attention Victor remembered from his own childhood. Though he couldn't recall who had provided it for him, Mason, typically the more reserved twin, was engaged in a way Victor rarely witnessed. The boy's brow was furrowed in concentration as he worked through the fraction problem, his pencil moving deliberately across the worksheet. When he made an error, Elena didn't immediately correct him, but instead asked gentle questions that guided him toward discovering the mistake himself. What do you think happens if we multiply both the top and bottom of this fraction by 2? Elena asked, pointing to Mason's work. It stays the same. Mason replied tentatively, let's see. Show me what that would look like. Sophia, meanwhile, was carefully painting her volcano with tempera paints, explaining her color choices to Elena with the kind of animated enthusiasm she rarely displayed around her father. I'm making it look like the pictures we saw of Mount Vesuvius, she said. The red and orange are for the lava, and the gray is for the ash cloud. That's wonderful attention to detail, Elena responded. Tell me what you learned about why volcanoes erupt. As Sophia launched into an explanation involving tectonic plates and magma pressure, Victor realized he was witnessing something he'd never seen before. His children engaged in genuine learning, supported by someone who seemed to truly understand how to nurture their curiosity, rather than simply ensuring tasks were completed. But it was what happened next that would change everything. Mason, having successfully solved his fraction problem, looked up at Elena with the expression of pure satisfaction. Thanks for helping me understand that, Mom Elena, he said casually, before returning to his worksheet. The word hung in the air like a bell that had been struck. Elena's hand paused midway through helping Sophia with her paint palette. She glanced quickly toward Mason, then at Sophia, who had also gone still. The moment stretched, filled with a significance that seemed to surprise all three of them. Mason started, his face flushing with embarrassment. I didn't mean to. It's okay, sweetie, Elena said gently, though Victor could see the emotion flickering across her features. I'm honored that you feel that way. Sophia looked between Elena and her brother, then spoke with the clarity that 8-year-olds sometimes possess when adults are struggling with complexity. You are like our mom, Miss Elena. You take care of us and help us with things and make sure we're okay. Dad gives us money for stuff, but you give us you. The simplicity of the statement hit Victor like a physical blow. His own daughter had just articulated a truth he'd been too busy, too distant, or too afraid to acknowledge. Elena Rodriguez wasn't just managing their household. She had become the emotional center of his children's world. From his position in the shadows of the archway, Victor watched Elena's eyes fill with tears she was trying to hide from the children. She reached out and smoothed Mason's hair with a tenderness that spoke of genuine affection rather than professional obligation. You both are very special to me, she said quietly. More special than you probably know. Do you have pictures of us in your room like moms do? Sophia asked with characteristic directness. Elena smiled through her tears. I have a whole album. Victor felt something crack open inside his chest, a fissure through which flooded a mixture of gratitude, shame, and a recognition so profound it left him breathless. These three people, seated around a simple table with math homework and a papier-mâché volcano, had created the family he'd been too absent to build. Elena Rodriguez, the woman he paid to manage his household, had given his children something no amount of money could purchase, the steady, unconditional presence of someone who saw them as more than obligations to be managed. She had become their emotional anchor, while he remained lost at sea in his own ambitions. But more than that, Victor realized with startling clarity, she had saved them from becoming casualties of his success. Without Elena's quiet devotion, Sophia and Mason might have grown up as emotionally orphaned as countless other children of absent, high-achieving parents. They might have learned to measure love in terms of material provision rather than presence, perpetuating a cycle of disconnection that Victor now recognized in his own upbringing. Standing there in the shadows, Victor understood that he was witnessing the most important moment of his adult life, not a business triumph or financial milestone, but the revelation that love had been flourishing in his home while he'd been too distracted to notice. The question that would haunt him through the sleepless night ahead was simple and devastating. What kind of man builds an empire but fails to know his own children? And more importantly, was it too late to become the father they deserved? Victor spent that night staring at the ceiling of his master bedroom, his mind replaying the scene from the kitchen with relentless precision. Sleep eluded him as he wrestled with questions that had no easy answers and truths that cut deeper than any business failure ever could. By dawn, he'd made a decision that would have seemed impossible just 24 hours earlier. He was going to cancel his meetings for the day. Not reschedule, cancel. The very thought sent ripples of anxiety through his chest, but for the first time in years, something mattered more than Meridian Industries' quarterly projections. At 7:30 a.m., Victor found himself in an unfamiliar position, sitting at the breakfast counter in his own kitchen, watching Elena prepare the twins' morning routine. She moved with practiced efficiency, packing lunches while simultaneously helping Sophia find her science project and ensuring Mason had completed his reading log. "Good morning, Mr. Blackwood," Elena said, clearly surprised to see him. "You're up early today. Would you like me to prepare something for breakfast?" "Actually," Victor said, the words feeling foreign in his mouth, "I was hoping to talk with you after the children leave for school." Something in his tone must have concerned her, because Elena's movements slowed slightly. "Of course, Mr. Blackwood, is everything all right?" Before Victor could respond, Sophia bounded into the kitchen, wearing her school uniform, but with her hair in complete disarray. "Miss Elena, I can't find my blue hair ribbon anywhere." "Check the bathroom vanity, sweetie. I think you left it there after brushing your teeth last night," Elena replied, without missing a beat. Mason appeared moments later, dragging his backpack and looking apologetic. "I forgot to tell you yesterday. I need poster board for art class today." "Already taken care of," Elena said, producing a pristine white poster board from behind the pantry door. "I picked it up when I noticed it on your supply list." Victor watched this morning choreography with fascination. Elena anticipated needs, solved problems, and maintained cheerful efficiency while managing two 8-year-olds who seemed determined to test every organizational system she'd put in place. More remarkably, she did it all while making each child feel heard and cared for. "Dad?" Sophia noticed him for the first time, her expression curious. "How come you're not getting ready for work?" The question hung in the air, highlighting how unusual his presence was at this hour. Victor felt a stab of recognition. His own daughter found it noteworthy that he was in the kitchen during their morning routine. "I wanted to see you both before school today," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "How did the volcano project turn out?" Sophia's face lit up with genuine excitement. "Really good. Miss Elena helped me make the eruption mixture last night after homework. Want to see?" Before Victor could respond, she was racing toward her backpack, returning with a small container of baking soda and food coloring. "We're going to add vinegar during science class, and it'll foam up like real lava." "That sounds incredible," Victor said, and meant it. When had he last shown genuine interest in their school projects? When had he last asked follow-up questions or celebrated their achievements? Mason, emboldened by his father's presence, showed him the math worksheet from the night before. "I got all the fraction problems right," he said quietly. "Miss Elena taught me a trick about finding common denominators." Victor examined his son's careful work, noting the neat handwriting and the small star Elena had drawn at the top of the page. "This is excellent work, Mason. I'm proud of you." The boy's smile was so genuine, so unguarded, that Victor felt another crack form in the wall he'd built around his emotions. How many moments like this had he missed? How many small victories had gone uncelebrated while he pursued larger, less meaningful conquests? After the twins left for school with Elena walking them to the bus stop as she did every morning, Victor found himself alone with the woman who had become the most important person in his children's lives. Elena returned to the kitchen and began clearing the breakfast dishes, her movements more cautious than usual. The easy comfort she displayed with the children had been replaced by professional reserve. "Please sit down," Victor said. "We need to talk." Elena sat across from him at the same table where he'd witnessed the homework scene the night before. In the morning light, he could see the worry lines around her eyes. The careful way she folded her hands in her lap. "I overheard you with the children last night," Victor began, then watched Elena's face pale. "When Mason called you, when he said what he said, Mr. Blackwood, I want you to know that I never encouraged—" "Stop," Victor interrupted gently. "Please just listen." Elena fell silent, but he could see her preparing for the worst: termination, accusations of overstepping boundaries, perhaps even threats about custody arrangements. The fear in her eyes made Victor realize how precarious her position truly was, despite how indispensable she'd become. "What I witnessed last night," Victor continued, choosing his words carefully, "was the most beautiful thing I've seen in years. My children were happy. They were learning. They felt safe and loved and supported. And it was because of you." Elena's eyes widened in surprise, but she remained silent. "I built a company worth billions," Victor said, his voice growing thick with emotion he'd suppressed for too long. "I can negotiate deals that affect thousands of jobs. I can predict market trends and outmaneuver competitors. But I couldn't figure out how to help my son with fraction homework. I didn't know Sophia was working on a volcano project. I'd been so focused on providing for them that I forgot to actually be present for them. Mr. Blackwood, you saved them. Elena, you saved my children from having a father who was physically present but emotionally absent. You gave them stability when I was giving them chaos. You showed them what unconditional care looks like when I was teaching them that love comes with conditions and schedules." Tears began flowing down Elena's cheeks, but she still said nothing. "Last night when Mason called you Mom Elena, I realized something that should have been obvious years ago. You are their mother figure, not their biological mother. No one could ever replace Victoria, but the person who mothers them every single day. You're the one who knows their fears and dreams and favorite foods and the way they like their bedtime stories read." Victor paused, gathering courage for what he needed to say next. "I have a choice to make," he continued. "I can keep living the way I've been living, successful by every external measure, but failing at the only thing that truly matters. Or I can change. I can learn to be the father they deserve, with your help." Elena finally spoke, her voice trembling. "What are you saying, Mr. Blackwood?" "I'm saying that I want to learn from you. I want you to teach me how to be present for my children the way you've been present for them. I want to understand what they need, how they learn, what makes them happy. I want to be part of their world instead of just funding it." Victor leaned forward, his decision crystallizing with each word. "I'm also saying that what you've given my children goes far beyond any job description. You've loved them when I was too busy to love them properly. You've been their anchor when I was lost at sea, and I need you to know that I see that. I value that, and I never want you to worry about job security or whether you belong in this family. Mr. Blackwood, I don't know what to say. Say you'll help me, Victor replied. Say you'll be patient while I learn how to be the father Mason and Sophia need. Say you'll teach me what you know about making them feel safe and valued and heard. Elena wiped her tears with the back of her hand, studying Victor's face as if trying to determine whether this transformation was genuine or temporary. They love you, you know, she said quietly. They just don't know how to reach you. You seem so busy, so important, that they're afraid to interrupt. The words hit Victor like physical blows, each one accurate and devastating. Then help me become reachable, he said. Help me show them that nothing is more important than they are. Elena Rodriguez, the woman who had quietly held his family together while he was busy conquering the world, nodded slowly. All right, Mr. Blackwood, let's figure this out together. Victor's transformation began with small, deliberate acts that felt monumental in their unfamiliarity. That very afternoon, he did something that would have been unthinkable just days. Earlier, he left Meridian Industries at 3:00 to be home when the twins returned from school. The drive through Lincoln Park felt different somehow, as if he were seeing the tree-lined streets for the first time. He noticed details that had been invisible during his usual rushed commutes. The way afternoon sunlight filtered through amber leaves, the children playing in front yards, the unhurried pace of life that existed beyond corporate boardrooms. When he arrived home, Elena was in the kitchen preparing after-school snacks. She looked up with surprise that was becoming familiar. The children will be home in about 20 minutes, she said, automatically shifting into coordination mode. Sophia has soccer practice at 5, and Mason has a book report due tomorrow that we need to work on. Actually, Victor said, feeling nervous about his next words, I was hoping I could take Mason to the library to work on his book report, and maybe drive Sophia to soccer practice myself. Elena paused in her preparation of apple slices and peanut butter. Are you sure, Mr. Blackwood? The Riverside Library can be busy after school, and Sophia's practice is across town. Traffic can be... I want to try, Victor interrupted gently. I know I'll probably need guidance, but I have to start somewhere. When the twins burst through the front door 30 minutes later, their surprise at seeing their father was both heartwarming and heartbreaking. Sophia actually looked behind him, as if expecting to find a business associate or emergency that would explain his presence. Dad? What are you doing home? Mason asked, not unkindly, just confused. I thought I'd help you with your book report today, Victor replied, trying to sound more confident than he felt. Elena told me you need to go to the library. Mason's eyes widened. You want to come to the library with me? If that's okay with you. The boy's face lit up with such genuine joy that Victor felt a mixture of happiness and regret. When had his presence become such an unexpected gift to his own children? An hour later, Victor found himself in the children's section of Riverside Library, watching Mason navigate the stacks with surprising expertise. The 8-year-old seemed to know exactly where to find books about his chosen topic, the migration, the patterns of monarch butterflies, while Victor felt completely out of his element. How? Do you know where everything is? Victor asked as Mason pulled 3 books from a shelf with practiced ease. Miss Elena brings us here every Thursday, Mason replied matter-of-factly. She says libraries are like treasure hunts, where the treasure is knowledge. Another reminder of how much of his children's world had been shaped by Elena's wisdom rather than his involvement. Victor pushed down the familiar wave of regret and focused on the present moment. Tell me about monarch butterflies, Victor said, as they settled at a small table designed for children. What made you choose that topic? Mason's eyes brightened as he opened the first book. They travel thousands of miles every year, but no single butterfly completes the whole journey. It takes like 3 or 4 generations to make the full trip. The great-great-grandchildren end up in the same places their great-great-grandparents started from. But they've never been there before. Victor found himself genuinely fascinated, not just by the information, but by the wonder in his son's voice. How do they know where to go if they've never been there? That's the mystery, Mason exclaimed. Scientists think it might be genetic memory or something with magnetic fields. Nobody knows for sure. For the next hour, Victor experienced something he hadn't felt in years, the pure joy of discovery alongside his child. Mason read passages aloud, showed him photographs of orange and black wings against blue skies, and explained migration routes with the enthusiasm of a natural teacher. But as they prepared to leave, Victor encountered his first real challenge. Mason's book report required a poster presentation, and the boy assumed Elena would help him create it that evening, as she always did. Actually, Victor said carefully, I was hoping we could work on the poster together tonight. After dinner, Mason's expression shifted, uncertainty replacing excitement. Do you know how to make posters, Dad? Miss Elena has special markers and poster board, and she knows how to make really neat lettering. The question revealed an uncomfortable truth. His 8-year-old son doubted his father's ability to help with the elementary school project. Victor realized that in Mason's experience, important tasks were handled by Elena, while Dad remained a distant figure who provided resources but not participation. I might not know all of Elena's techniques, Victor admitted, but I'd like to learn. Maybe we could ask her to teach us both? Meanwhile, Sophia's soccer practice presented its own revelations. Victor had never attended one of her games or practices, always delegating such responsibilities to Elena or the occasional hired driver. He'd assumed youth soccer was a casual affair, but as he watched 8-year-olds execute complex passing drills with intense concentration, he realized he'd been missing something significant. Sophia played midfielder with a determination that surprised him. She communicated constantly with her teammates, calling out plays and encouragement with natural leadership skills Victor hadn't known she possessed. When she scored during a scrimmage, she looked immediately toward the sidelines, not for him but scanning for Elena, who usually attended practices. When she spotted Victor instead, her reaction was a mixture of delight and confusion. She waved enthusiastically, but then seemed unsure whether to continue with the intensity she'd been displaying, or to perform differently now that her father was watching. After practice, as they walked to the car, Sophia peppered him with questions that revealed how little he knew about her interests. "Did you see my header in the second half?" she asked eagerly. Victor, who had been checking his phone during that moment, felt heat rise in his cheeks. "Remind me which one that was?" Sophia's face fell slightly. "The one where I jumped up and hit the ball with my head to pass it to Emma. Coach Martinez said it was perfect form." "That's wonderful, sweetheart," Victor said. But he could tell his generic response wasn't what she'd hoped for. The drive home was filled with Sophia's animated recap of the practice. But Victor sensed her growing disappointment as his responses revealed his lack of soccer knowledge. She began explaining basic concepts, what offside meant, why her position was called midfielder, how many players were on each team, with the patient tone of someone teaching a beginner. That evening, the poster project proved even more challenging than Victor had anticipated. Elena had graciously offered to guide them through her usual process, but Victor quickly discovered that what looked effortless when she did it required skills he'd never developed. His lettering was crooked and inconsistent. His spacing was awkward. His color choices clashed in ways that made Mason wince. Most frustrating of all, his corporate perfectionism made him want to control every aspect of the project, while Mason needed freedom to express his own ideas. "Dad, you're making the butterfly too big," Mason said gently, as Victor attempted to draw a monarch for the poster's border. "It needs to fit with the other ones." Victor looked down at his oversized, lopsided butterfly and felt a familiar surge of frustration. In boardrooms, his ideas were implemented without question. Here, his 8-year-old son was diplomatically suggesting his artistic contributions were subpar. "Maybe I should let you handle the drawing," Victor said, stepping back from the poster. "No, keep trying," Mason encouraged. Miss Elena always says mistakes are just practice in disguise. Elena, who had been observing from across the kitchen, approached with gentle wisdom. Mr. Blackwood, perhaps start smaller. Mason, why don't you show your father how you usually approach the drawing part? For the next 20 minutes, Victor found himself taking instruction from his son, learning to sketch lightly before committing to bold lines, discovering that imperfection could be charming rather than shameful, and experiencing the humbling joy of being a student rather than always the teacher. By bedtime, the poster was completed, not perfect by professional standards, but filled with genuine effort from both father and son. As Victor tucked Mason into bed, the boy looked up at him with an expression of cautious hope. "Dad, could you help me with my next project too?" "I'd love that," Victor replied, meaning it completely. But as he walked down the hallway toward his own bedroom, Victor felt the weight of how much he needed to learn, how many skills Elena made look effortless, and how patient his children would need to be as he stumbled through the basics of being present. In their daily lives, the transformation he'd committed to was proving more complex than any business challenge he'd ever faced. Success here couldn't be measured in quarterly profits or market share. It would be measured in moments like Mason's smile over a crooked butterfly, or Sophia's excited wave from a soccer field, or Elena's encouraging nod as he learned to be the father his children deserved. 2 weeks into Victor's newfound commitment to fatherhood, everything fell apart in the most devastating way possible. It began with a phone call at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. Victor was in the kitchen attempting to make pancakes from scratch, an ambitious breakfast project that Elena had been patiently guiding him through when his phone rang with the distinctive tone reserved for board members. "Victor, we have a crisis," came the urgent voice of Margaret Chen, Meridian's chief operating officer. "The Yamamoto deal is imploding. They're threatening to pull out entirely, and if they walk, we lose the entire Asian expansion. I need you on a plane to Tokyo within the hour." Victor felt his carefully constructed new world tilt dangerously. The Yamamoto partnership represented 18 months of negotiations and potentially $3 billion in revenue over the next 5 years. It wasn't just a deal, it was Meridian's entire strategy for international growth. "What happened?" he asked, glancing toward the stairs where he could hear the twins getting ready for school. "Cultural miscommunication during yesterday's video conference. Johnson made comments about efficiency improvements that the Yamamoto team interpreted as criticism of their traditional methods. They're calling it disrespectful and are considering this grounds for termination." Victor closed his eyes, immediately understanding the magnitude of the disaster. James Johnson, Meridian's head of operations, was brilliant with logistics, but had the cultural sensitivity of a bulldozer. Victor should have been on that call. In the old days, he would have been. "Dad, the pancakes are smoking," Sophia's voice cut through his thoughts. Victor turned to see his daughter standing in the kitchen doorway, pointing at the stovetop where his abandoned pancake batter was indeed burning in the pan. Smoke was beginning to fill the kitchen, and the acrid smell would soon trigger the smoke detectors. "Victor, are you there?" Margaret's voice pressed through the phone. "I'm here," he replied, rushing to turn off the burner while waving a dish towel at the smoke detector. "Can't we handle this with another video conference?" "I could." "Absolutely not. The only way to salvage this is face-to-face meetings. You need to be on that plane, Victor. The board is meeting in emergency session at 8 a.m., and they're expecting your travel plans." As if summoned by the chaos, Eleanor appeared in the kitchen, quickly assessing the situation. She opened windows, turned on the exhaust fan, and began cleaning up the burnt pancake mess without a word of criticism. "I'll make toast," she said quietly to the twins, who had both appeared to investigate the commotion. Mason looked between his father, the phone pressed to his ear, and the smoking pan with an expression Victor recognized: resignation. It was the look of a child who had learned not to expect too much. "Dad, you're leaving again, aren't you?" Sophia asked with the bluntness that 8-year-olds possess when adults are trying to hide difficult truths. Victor covered the phone's microphone. "I don't know yet, sweetheart. Victor." Margaret's voice had grown sharp with impatience. "I need an answer. The car can be at your house in 20 minutes. The weight of the moment crashed down on Victor with suffocating force. On one side stood his children, who had just begun to trust that he might actually be present in their lives. On the other side loomed the collapse of everything he'd spent 15 years building: his company, his employees' livelihoods, his investors' trust. But it was Elena's expression that cut deepest. She wasn't angry or accusatory. Instead, she looked at him with something far worse: understanding. She had seen this exact scenario play out countless times before. Important call, urgent crisis, dad disappears for days or weeks, while children learn once again that they are not the priority. "The science fair is Thursday," Mason said quietly, his voice barely audible over the kitchen fan. "You said you'd help me set up my butterfly exhibit." Victor felt something break inside his chest. 2 weeks ago, he'd promised Mason he'd be there for the science fair. They'd spent 3 evenings working together on the display. And Mason had been so proud to tell his classmates that his dad would be attending. "Victor, I need an answer now," Margaret insisted through the phone. "Every minute we delay makes this worse." "Sophia has her championship soccer game on Saturday," Eleanor said softly, not as an accusation, but as a simple statement of fact. "She's been training for months." The silence in the kitchen stretched taut as everyone, even the twins, seemed to understand they were witnessing a crucial moment. Victor looked at his children's faces and saw a mixture of hope and premature disappointment, as if they were already preparing to be let down, but still desperately wanting to be surprised. "I'll be right back," Victor told his family, stepping into the adjacent breakfast nook for privacy. "Margaret, I can't go to Tokyo," he said, his voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside his chest. "What do you mean you can't go?" "Victor, this is a $3 billion deal. Send Patricia Martinez. She's fluent in Japanese culture. She's been involved in the negotiations from the beginning, and frankly, she might be better at salvaging this than I would be." "Patricia." "Victor, they want to deal with the CEO. They want to deal with you. Then we'll arrange a video conference where I can formally apologize for Johnson's comments and introduce Patricia as my personal representative for this deal. But I'm not getting on a plane to Tokyo today." The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long that Victor wondered if the call had dropped. "Victor," Margaret said finally, her voice carefully controlled, "I need to be very clear about what you're saying. If this deal falls apart because you won't travel to Tokyo, the board will have serious questions about your priorities and your commitment to this company." The implicit threat hung in the air like smoke from the burnt pancakes. Victor's position as CEO, which had seemed unshakable just weeks ago, was suddenly contingent on his willingness to abandon his children once again for the sake of corporate crisis management. "I understand the consequences," Victor replied, surprised by the steadiness in his own voice. "Do you?" "Because I don't think you do. This isn't just about one deal, Victor. This is about whether Meridian Industries can count on its CEO to be present when the company needs him most." Victor walked to the breakfast nook's window, looking out at the garden where his children played every afternoon while he worked late at the office. "The company needs me to make good decisions, Margaret. And the decision I'm making is to trust our team to handle this crisis, while I honor commitments I've made to people who matter more than any deal." When he returned to the kitchen, the twins were eating Elena's hastily prepared toast, their eyes watching him with careful attention. Elena was loading the dishwasher, but he could see the tension in her shoulders. "I'm not going to Tokyo," Victor announced. Sophia's face lit up with disbelief. Really, you're staying?" "Really? I promised Mason I'd be at the science fair, and I promised you I'd be at your championship game. Those promises matter more than any business deal." Mason's smile was so brilliant it could have powered the entire house. But even as Victor felt the warmth of his children's joy, he knew the consequences of his choice would reverberate through every aspect of his professional life. By evening, the Yamamoto deal had indeed collapsed. By the end of the week, Meridian's stock price had dropped 12%. By the following Monday, Victor was facing a vote of no confidence from his own board of directors. The choice he'd made in his kitchen that Tuesday morning would test everything he'd learned about what truly mattered in life. But as he watched Mason carefully arrange butterfly specimens for the science fair, and as he cheered from the sidelines while Sophia scored the winning goal in her championship game, Victor began to understand that some victories were worth any price, even if that price was everything he'd thought defined success. The deepest challenge hadn't been learning to help with homework or navigate soccer practices. It had been choosing his children over the empire he'd built, knowing that choice might cost him everything except the only things that truly mattered. The board meeting that would determine Victor's fate as CEO was scheduled for Thursday afternoon, the same day as Mason's science fair. As Victor sat in Lincoln Elementary School's gymnasium at 10 a.m., surrounded by colorful displays of volcanoes, plant growth experiments and solar system models, he realized he'd never felt more at peace about a decision that could destroy his career. Mason stood beside his butterfly migration exhibit, wearing a collared shirt Elena had helped him pick out, and a nervous smile that reminded Victor painfully of himself at that age. The display was impressive for a third grader. Detailed charts showing migration routes, photographs of monarch butterflies at different life stages, and a small glass case containing chrysalises that Mason had carefully observed over the past month. "Tell me about your hypothesis," said Mrs. Patterson, the science fair judge, as she approached their station. Victor watched with amazement as his son transformed into a confident young scientist, explaining genetic memory and magnetic navigation with enthusiasm that made complex concepts accessible. Where had this passion for learning come from? How had he missed seeing this brilliant, curious mind developing under his own roof? "My dad helped me with the research," Mason said proudly, glancing at Victor. "We went to the library together and found books about animal navigation. Did you know that sea turtles use magnetic fields too?" The simple pride in his son's voice hit Victor like a revelation. In all his years of business achievements, IPOs, acquisitions, industry awards, nothing had ever felt as meaningful as hearing Mason claim him as a research partner. But it was what happened next that changed everything. As the judges moved to the next display, a man Victor didn't recognize approached their station. He was perhaps 60, wearing a casual blazer and carrying a notebook that suggested he was some kind of official observer. "Excuse me," the man said to Victor. "I'm Dr. Michael Harrison from the University of Chicago's Education Research Institute. I've been observing family engagement patterns at science fairs across the district." Victor tensed, unsure where this conversation was heading. "I couldn't help but notice the exceptional quality of your son's project and the genuine partnership you two seem to have developed. It's quite rare to see this level of authentic collaboration between parent and child. Usually it's clear when projects are primarily parent-driven or when parents are merely providing financial support without real involvement." Dr. Harrison turned to Mason. "Young man, what was the most interesting thing you learned during this project?" Mason's face lit up. "That butterflies can remember places their great-great-grandparents have been, even though they've never been there themselves. And that my dad didn't know that either, so we got to learn it together." "You learned it together?" "Yeah," Mason continued enthusiastically. "Dad's really smart about business stuff, but he didn't know about monarch butterflies. So we were both discovering new things at the same time. That was the coolest part." Dr. Harrison made a note in his book, then looked at Victor with curiosity. "What motivated you to take such an active role in this project?" The question caught Victor off guard. How could he explain the journey that had brought him to this gymnasium? From the evening he'd overheard Elena being called Mom to the morning he'd chosen his children over a billion-dollar deal. "I realized I'd been missing the most important education of my life," Victor said finally. "Learning who my children really are." Dr. Harrison nodded thoughtfully. "And what have you discovered?" Victor looked at Mason, who was carefully adjusting one of his butterfly photographs. and felt something unlock in his chest, a clarity that had been building through weeks of small revelations. "I've discovered that my son is a natural teacher," Victor said. "He has this gift for taking complex ideas and making them understandable and exciting. I've watched him explain magnetic navigation to other kids today with patience I never knew he possessed." He paused, words flowing from some deep well of recognition. "I've also discovered that my daughter has leadership qualities that would put most executives to shame. She sees problems and solutions simultaneously. She encourages her teammates even when she's frustrated. She never gives up, even when things look hopeless." As Victor spoke, he realized he wasn't just answering Dr. Harrison's question. He was articulating truths that had been crystallizing throughout his transformation. "But most importantly," he continued, "I've discovered that being successful in business means nothing if you're failing at being present for the people who matter most. My children don't need me to buy them things or solve their problems for them. They need me to show up. They need me to be genuinely interested in their world. They need me to learn alongside them, rather than always trying to teach them." Dr. Harrison was writing rapidly now. "That's a profound insight. What prompted this realization?" Victor smiled, thinking of Elena's quiet wisdom and patient guidance. "Someone very special showed me what unconditional support looks like. She demonstrated that love isn't about providing solutions, it's about providing presence. And she helped me understand that my children had been trying to teach me this lesson for years. I just hadn't been paying attention." At that moment, Mason tugged on Victor's sleeve. "Dad, they're about to announce the winners." As they stood together waiting for the results, Victor felt his phone buzzing insistently in his pocket. He knew it was probably Margaret Chen or another board member, checking on his availability for the afternoon meeting that could end his tenure as CEO. But for the first time in his professional life, those calls felt genuinely unimportant. "Third place in the elementary division," the principal announced, "goes to Sarah Martinez for her project on renewable energy sources." Polite applause filled the gymnasium. "Second place goes to Kevin Wu for his investigation of plant growth in different soil conditions." More applause. Victor could feel Mason's nervous energy beside him. "And first place in the elementary division goes to Mason Blackwood for his comprehensive study of monarch butterfly migration patterns." The eruption of applause was joined by Mason's delighted shout and an impulsive hug that nearly knocked Victor over. In that moment, holding his son as the boy vibrated with pure joy, Victor experienced something he'd never felt during any business triumph: complete, unqualified happiness, with no underlying anxiety about what came next. "We won, Dad." "We actually won!" Mason exclaimed, and Victor noticed the word "we." As they walked to the front of the gymnasium to collect Mason's blue ribbon, Victor's phone rang again. This time, he didn't ignore it, but his response was different than it would have been a month earlier. "Margaret, I'm at my son's science fair. He just won first place. No, I won't be available until after 3 o'clock. The board meeting can start without me, or we can reschedule. My son and I are going out to celebrate his victory." When he hung up, Mason looked at him with an expression of wonder. "You told your work that I was more important." "You are more important," Victor replied, the truth of it settling into his bones with absolute certainty. "You and Sophia are the most important things in my world." As they drove home with Mason's blue ribbon proudly displayed on the dashboard, Victor realized that Dr. Harrison's questions had helped him articulate something crucial. His transformation hadn't just been about learning to be present for his children. It had been about discovering that his children had always been trying to teach him what really mattered. Elena had simply created the space for him to finally hear their lessons. The breakthrough hadn't been learning new skills or changing his schedule. It had been recognizing that success wasn't something he needed to achieve for his children. It was something he could experience with them, one shared discovery at a time. By the time they pulled into their driveway, Victor knew that whatever happened in the board meeting that afternoon, he had already won the only victory that would matter 20 years from now. And for the first time in his adult life, that was enough. The board meeting that Victor finally attended at 4:30 that afternoon was unlike any he'd experienced in his 15-year tenure as CEO. He entered Meridian's conference room, carrying Mason's blue ribbon in his jacket pocket and a perspective that made the mahogany table an intimidating portraits of company. Founders seemed suddenly small and temporary. 12 board members sat in judgment, their expressions ranging from concerned to openly hostile. Margaret Chen looked exhausted, having spent the day fielding calls from investors and the financial press about Meridian's future without the Yamamoto deal. "Victor," began Robert Sterling, the board's longest-serving member, "we need to discuss your recent decisions and their impact on this company's trajectory." "Before we begin," Victor said, settling into his chair with an unusual calm, "I want to share something with all of you. This afternoon, I watched my 8-year-old son win first place at his school science fair for a project we worked on together. He spent weeks learning about monarch butterfly migration patterns, and in the process, he taught me something I'd forgotten, that the most important journeys aren't about reaching destinations quickly, but about who travels with you along the way." The room fell silent. Several board members exchanged glances that suggested Victor had confirmed their worst fears about his mental state. "Victor," Margaret said carefully, "while we're happy about Mason's achievement, we're here to discuss the collapse of a $3 billion deal and what that means for Meridian's future." "I understand," Victor replied, "and I want you to know that Patricia Martinez successfully renegotiated a modified agreement with Yamamoto Industries this morning. The deal is smaller, $2.1 billion over 6 years, instead of $3 billion over 5, but it includes technology sharing, provisions that make it more valuable long-term than the original proposal." The statement landed like a thunderbolt. Margaret's eyes widened with surprise that bordered on shock. "How is that possible?" asked board member David Chen. "Yesterday they were refusing all communication." Patricia approached them differently than we had before. Instead of emphasizing efficiency improvements, she focused on collaborative enhancement of existing processes. She spent time understanding their cultural concerns and positioned our partnership as mutual learning rather than American optimization of Japanese methods. Victor paused, letting the information settle. "The truth is, Patricia was always the right person to lead this negotiation. My presence would have been symbolic rather than substantive. By staying here for my children's commitments, I created space for the person with the actual expertise to succeed." The room buzzed with quiet conversations as board members processed this unexpected development. Robert Sterling leaned forward, his expression shifting from disapproval to curiosity. "Victor, are you suggesting that your absence from crisis management actually benefited the company?" "I'm suggesting that effective leadership isn't about being indispensable. It's about building systems and developing people so that the company can thrive regardless of where the CEO happens to be on any given day." Over the following weeks, Victor began implementing changes at Meridian that reflected his evolving understanding of true success. He restructured his schedule to include non-negotiable time blocks for family commitments. He delegated more authority to department heads, discovering that many decisions he'd considered crucial actually functioned better when handled by people closer to the operational details. Most surprisingly, Meridian's performance improved. Employee satisfaction scores rose as Victor's more collaborative leadership style trickled down through the organization. Innovation increased when teams felt empowered to take initiatives without waiting for CEO approval. Client relationships strengthened as account managers took greater ownership of their partnerships. But the real growth was happening at home. Victor had begun what Elena called learning. Rounds, structured time each week where he focused entirely on understanding his children's worlds. Tuesday evenings became Sophia time, when Victor attended soccer practices, learned the rules that had previously mystified him, and discovered that his daughter possessed strategic thinking skills that rivaled his business acumen. She could read opposing teams' formations, anticipate plays, and make split-second decisions under pressure with remarkable consistency. "Dad, watch how their midfielder always drifts left when they're about to attack," Sophia explained during one practice, pointing out patterns Victor had never noticed. "If our defense shifts to compensate, we can steal the ball and counterattack through the right side." Victor found himself taking notes on his daughter's tactical observations, realizing that her 8-year-old brain understood complex systems in ways that would impress military strategists. Thursday evenings belonged to Mason, who had developed an insatiable curiosity about how things worked. They took apart old electronics, built model airplanes, and conducted experiments that Elena had learned to prepare for by covering kitchen surfaces with newspaper. "Why do you think the battery makes the motor spin?" Victor would ask, guiding Mason toward discoveries rather than simply providing answers. "Because electricity travels through the wires and creates invisible force?" Mason would respond, his face scrunched in concentration. "Show me what you mean by invisible force." These conversations taught Victor that his son possessed the methodical curiosity of a natural scientist, approaching problems with patience and systematic thinking that Victor had never bothered to nurture. But perhaps most importantly, Victor began having regular conversations with Elena about parenting philosophy and child development. These discussions, usually held after the twins were asleep, became a masterclass in understanding the complex emotional needs of children. They're not projects to be managed, Elena explained one evening as they reviewed Sophia's recent struggles with a difficult classmate. "They're individuals figuring out who they are. Your job isn't to solve their problems, but to help them develop the tools to solve problems themselves." "How do I know when to step in and when to let them struggle?" Victor asked. "Watch their faces," Elena replied. "When they're frustrated but engaged, they're learning. When they're frustrated and shutting down, they need support." The key is recognizing the difference. These insights transformed Victor's approach, not just to parenting, but to leadership at Meridian. He began applying Elena's wisdom to employee development, recognizing when team members needed guidance versus when they needed space to find their own solutions. The culmination of this growth period came during the twins' winter break, when Victor made a decision that would have been unthinkable months earlier. He announced a company-wide policy that senior executives would take mandatory time off during school holidays, with no exceptions for urgent matters. Companies that can't function without their leadership team for a week have fundamental structural problems, he told the senior staff meeting. "We're going to prove that Meridian is stronger than that." The policy was initially met with resistance from managers accustomed to round-the-clock availability. But when Victor spent the entire week of winter break building snow forts with his children, helping Elena prepare elaborate family dinners, and reading bedtime stories without checking his phone once, something shifted throughout the organization. Employees began taking their own vacation time more seriously. Work-life balance stopped being a buzzword and became a practiced value. Productivity increased as people returned from actual rest periods, refreshed and creative, rather than simply exhausted. Most tellingly, Meridian's client retention rates improved as account managers became more strategic and thoughtful in their approach. Rather than simply reactive to every client request, Victor had discovered that the principles that made him a better father, patience, active listening, collaborative problem-solving, and sustainable pacing, also made him a more effective CEO. But the true measure of his transformation came during a quiet moment in late December, when Sophia asked him a question that revealed how profoundly their relationship had changed. "Dad," she said as they decorated their Christmas tree together, "remember when you used to be gone all the time?" "Who do?" Victor replied carefully. "I'm glad you learned how to stay home," she said simply, hanging a handmade ornament on a low branch. "You're much more fun when you're actually here." In that moment, Victor understood that he hadn't just saved his relationship with his children, he had discovered what it meant to be truly successful at the only job that would matter at the end of his life. 1 year later, on a warm spring evening in Lincoln Park, Victor found himself in a place he never could have imagined, sitting on his back porch, grading spelling tests alongside Elena, while Sophia and Mason played capture the flag with neighborhood children in the garden he'd finally learned to see as more than expensive. Landscaping. The transformation was so complete that visitors to the Blackwood household often assumed Elena was Victor's wife rather than the woman who had saved his family by loving his children when he'd forgotten how. But the three adults had developed their own unique dynamic, Elena as the steady wisdom that anchored their household, Victor as the engaged father learning to balance presence with providing, and together they created something that resembled the family Victor had always thought he wanted but never known how to build. Miss Sophia spelled friendship with 2 D's again. Elena noted with gentle amusement, showing Victor his daughter's test paper. "She's thinking phonetically," Victor replied, a phrase he'd learned from Mason's teacher during one of the parent conferences he now attended religiously. Her logic makes sense, even if it's not conventional. These evening grading sessions had become routine after Victor discovered that reviewing his children's schoolwork gave him insights into their developing minds that no amount of expensive educational consultants could provide. He could see Sophia's creative problem-solving in her math work, where she often found correct answers through unconventional methods. He could track Mason's growing confidence in his writing, as book reports evolved from tentative paragraphs to enthusiastic essays about monarch butterflies, space exploration, and the mysteries of ocean currents. "Dad!" Mason called from the garden, interrupting Victor's review of a particularly imaginative story about a robot who learned to garden. "Come play with us! We need another person for teams." 6 months earlier, Victor would have begged off, citing work emails or important calls. Tonight, he set down the spelling tests without hesitation. "Save my place," he told Elena, with a grin that still surprised him with its ease. As Victor joined the impromptu neighborhood game, he marveled at how completely his definition of important had shifted. The children playing in his garden ranged from 6 to 12 years old, representing families from throughout Lincoln Park. Their parents had gradually begun accepting invitations to the informal gatherings that seemed to spring up naturally around the Blackwood household. Mr. Blackwood's really fast for a grown-up, he overheard one of Sophia's friends tell another, and felt ridiculously proud of the compliment. The game dissolved into laughter as younger children forgot the rules and older ones invented new ones to accommodate everyone. Victor found himself appointed as the final judge for disputed captures, a role that reminded him of boardroom negotiations but felt infinitely more meaningful. As the sun set and families began calling children home, Victor experienced the deep satisfaction that had become familiar over the past year, the knowledge that he had been fully present for moments that would never come again. Later that evening, after homework was completed and bedtime stories were read, Victor found Elena in the kitchen preparing ingredients for the next day's lunches. "You know," he said, settling onto one of the stools at the kitchen island, "I've been thinking about something." "What's that, Mr. Blackwood?" "You haven't called me Mr. Blackwood when the children aren't around for months now, but you still do it when they are." Elena paused in her sandwich preparation, her expression thoughtful. "I suppose I want them to understand that there are different kinds of respect and different kinds of relationships. But what would you call me if the choice were entirely yours?" She smiled, the kind of warm, genuine expression that had become common in their household. "I think I'd call you Victor, or perhaps the children's father, which is the most important title you have." "I've been thinking about titles too," Victor said. "And I realize that in any meaningful sense, you are their mother. Not their biological mother. No one could ever replace Victoria, but the person who has mothered them through the most." important years of their development. Elena's eyes filled with the tears that still came whenever the significance of her role in the children's lives was acknowledged directly. I've also been thinking about our arrangement here, Victor continued. You've never just been our housekeeper, Elena. You've been the heart of this family. And I want to make sure you know that this is your home, not just your workplace. Victor, what are you saying? I'm saying that I've had my attorney draft papers that give you legal guardianship rights for Sophia and Mason, should anything ever happen to me. I'm saying that the house has a trust established that ensures you'll never have to worry about housing security. I'm saying that your role in this family deserves recognition and protection. Elena sat down heavily on the stool across from him, overwhelmed by the implications of his words. But more than that, Victor continued, I want you to know that what you did for my children, loving them when I was too lost to love them properly, saved not just them, but me. You showed me what unconditional care looks like. You demonstrated that success isn't about achievement, it's about showing up. You taught me that the most important education happens around kitchen tables and in library visits and at science fairs. You learned those things yourself, Victor. I just created space for you to remember what you already knew. Maybe, Victor said, but without your example, I never would have understood that being present isn't about having time. It's about making time. That love isn't about providing solutions, it's about sharing experiences. The conversation was interrupted by padding footsteps on the kitchen tile. Sophia appeared in the doorway, clutching her favorite stuffed animal and wearing the expression of a child who had heard adult voices and wanted reassurance. Is everything okay? She asked. Everything's perfect, sweetheart, Victor replied, opening his arms. Miss Elena and I were just talking about how lucky we are to be a family. Sophia climbed onto Victor's lap, automatically making space for Elena to smooth her hair in the gesture that had become as natural as breathing. Are we always going to be a family? Sophia asked with the directness that still caught Victor off guard. Always, Elena and Victor said simultaneously, then laughed at their synchronicity. Mason appeared moments later, drawn by the sound of conversation and laughter. Soon, all four of them were clustered around the kitchen island, sharing stories about the day and making plans for the weekend. As Victor listened to his children's animated discussion of the upcoming school carnival where they wanted to volunteer at the face-painting booth, he reflected on how completely his life had been reconstructed. Meridian Industries continued to thrive under his more balanced leadership style. The company had been recognized with 3 industry awards for innovation and workplace culture. Victor's willingness to delegate had revealed talented leaders throughout the organization, creating redundancy and resilience that made the company stronger than when everything had depended on his personal involvement. But the real measure of success was happening in this kitchen, in the easy intimacy of a family that had learned to prioritize presence over productivity, connection over achievement. Dad, Mason said, interrupting Victor's reverie, next week we're studying family trees in school. Can Miss Elena be on mine? Of course she can, Victor replied. She's family in every way that matters. Elena's smile was radiant as she reached over to adjust Mason's pajama collar, a small gesture that contained years of accumulated love and care. Later, after the children were asleep and Elena had retired to her room, Victor stood in his study, looking at the family photographs that had replaced his business awards on the desk. Pictures of science fairs and soccer games, of library visits and backyard camping trips, of moments, both ordinary and extraordinary, that documented a year of learning what really mattered. The phone on his desk remained silent, a radical change from the constant interruptions that had once defined his evenings. His team at Meridian had learned to handle crises without requiring his immediate input, and Victor had discovered that most urgent matters resolved themselves quite well without CEO intervention. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, both at work and at home. Sophia had a soccer tournament where she'd been selected as team captain, a responsibility she approached with characteristic determination. Mason had been invited to present his butterfly research at the district science showcase, an honor that filled him with nervous excitement. And Victor would be there for both events, not as a distracted observer checking his phone, but as a father who understood that these moments were the most important meetings of his career. As he turned off the study lights and headed upstairs, Victor thought about the evening when he'd overheard Mason call Elena Mom Elena, the moment that had cracked open his understanding of what family really meant. That night, he'd been a successful CEO but a failing father. Tonight, he was both a successful businessman and a present parent, having learned that the two achievements weren't mutually exclusive. They were mutually reinforcing. The silent guardian who had saved his family had taught him the most valuable lesson of all, that love isn't something you provide for people you care about. It's something you share with them, one present moment at a time. And in learning to be present for his children, Victor had discovered that he'd been absent from his own life for far too long. Elena hadn't just saved Sophia and Mason from an emotionally absent father. She had saved Victor from a life that looked successful from the outside but felt empty from within. Now, as he quietly checked on his sleeping children and saw Elena's light still on as she prepared materials for tomorrow's adventures, Victor understood that he had been given the rarest of gifts, a second chance to get the most important things right. This was his new reality, a life built on presence rather than productivity, connection rather than conquest, love rather than achievement. And it was, without question, the greatest success of his career. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.